السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. My brothers, and I can only see brothers thus far, let's go ahead and start. We want to make sure that we do everything on time. As always, inshallah, we will start with a review of what we did last week. We did Surah al-Nasr last week. And a quick review, very, very quickly. Number one, we said that every life has seasons, and the things we have to do in each season change with the season. So the responsibilities that we have, the kinds of things that we focus on, they change with each season in our lives. And each person has to fulfill the mission that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, right? So the mission is number one, the worship of the Creator, and number two, the service of the creation of the Creator. And each person has been given a certain set of resources and limitations, and we do whatever we can within within whatever we've been given to fulfill the mission. The third thing that we said was that the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the sweetest pleasure, unmatched by anything else. And it is easy to get swayed by it to the extent that that's all we want to do. But in this world, in different seasons of our lives, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects us to do different things and focus on going out and about and serving the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, either by inviting them to the truth or by doing welfare work, or just the fact that we have to earn a living, or by taking care of the people we've been made responsible for. Those are things we have to do in certain seasons of our lives. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us the opportunity where the amount of dhikr that we do, amount of time that we spend in dhikr, the amount of time that we spend in our worship during the night, that proportion will begin to increase in other seasons in our lives. So this is a quick summary of what we did in Surah al-Nasr, which was addressed to the Prophet ﷺ, but also, of course, addressed to us. You see, Surah al-Nasr was about doing things that we may not necessarily want to do. We may not necessarily be excited about doing. In fact, some of those things may even be a little bit unpleasant. But by doing those things, we're building our character. And that is the topic that, inshallah, we'll be discussing today in Surah al-Masad, which is also called Surah al-Lahab, both names for the same surah. The focus is character. So before we go into the surah, let's talk about what character is. And that's my question to you. Can you guys share with me in your own words, how do you describe character? What is a person's character? How would you describe it? And while you're doing that, I'm going to just share with you that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala values people's character to the extent that whether a person's character is good, or in other cases, if it is not good, sometimes it is mentioned in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals people's character. In the meanwhile, please share with me, what are your thoughts on what a person's character really is? So the first set of verses that you see at the top, it is an expose of a person's character. And this person's name was Walid bin Mughira. This was one of the most powerful chieftains of Quraysh. He was well known. He had many children. Okay, so your habits and personality, sure, yeah, that's about right. But the personality you can't really do much about, because those are the traits that you are kind of born with. Habits, though, certainly fall in that. What other humans describe of you? Sure, that's another interesting way of looking at it. If you were not present, and if somebody were to describe you to other people, what words would they use? Sure, your character would probably fall in there somewhere. Yep. And here, as I was sharing with you, in the first set of verses that you see at the top, this is the character of Walid bin Mughira as described by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran. As I mentioned to you, very powerful chieftain of the Quraysh, and he had many sons, which was a source of power among the Quraysh, among the Arabs in general. He had a lot of money, so he was very wealthy. He had a lot of connections. So by all accounts, and he came from a very well-known tribe. So by all accounts, Walid bin Mughira was a powerful man, and he wanted people to look up to him, and he wanted people to listen to him just because he said something. And he expected to be obeyed. No one no one really said anything bad about him. Now, two of our sisters described character. It has something to do with your habits and what other people would describe of you. The kind of people who'd be able to describe your character are the kinds of people who are close to you, people who have spent time with you, people who have gotten to know you better over a period of time. Or people who, for example, we say in our culture, if you travel with someone, you get to know about their character a little bit. But people who don't know you very well, who may just know your name or may have met you a few times, or maybe just see you at work, or have not really had the opportunity to interact with you a lot, they don't know your true character. In these verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is revealing the character of Walid bin Mughira. And I'm going to recite these verses to you, and I want you to imagine that in this society in Mecca, where the outward is everything, the kind of storm that these verses would have created. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah al-Qalam, وَلَا تُطِعْ كُلَّ حَلَّافٍ مَهِينٍ, and do not obey the despicable, vain oath taker. This means somebody who just makes promises and doesn't keep them, commits but doesn't fulfill commitments. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do not obey such a person. And everybody knew that because of the context mentioned in the earlier part of the surah, that this is Walid bin Mughira being talked about. Hammazim masha'im bin Amim. Not just that, he's a slanderer. He says bad things, makes up bad things about other people. And he's a gossip monger. He likes to talk about other people when they're not present. Hey, that guy, what he did? You know what that happened? I saw this happen. So gossip monger, meaning he may be relating something true. Slanderer, which means he may be making something up. He just likes to talk in order to impose his importance. Notice the character being revealed. He's a brute, and on top of all of that, an illegitimate child. This is withholder of good, transgressor, and evildoer. And then this is brute, and on top of that, an illegitimate child. And actually, he himself didn't know about this. But in that society, being an illegitimate child was a big deal. It was a source of great shame. And apparently, when these verses were revealed, he investigated and he discovered his parents didn't tell him, but it was true. And kana dha malin wa banin. Now, simply because he's been blessed with abundant wealth and children. So this is the only reason why he goes about in a very haughty, arrogant kind of way and expects people to obey him. This is Walid bin Mughira, the outside of him and the inside of him. The inside of him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us, the outside of him is what everybody else sees. The inside of him is the character being talked about here. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is emphasizing the importance of character. The second verse that you see at the bottom is in Surah al-Baqarah. This is about another person in Mecca whose name was Suhaib. Suhaib al-Rumi is what we know him as today. He was either a Roman or an Arab who had lived among the Romans, but in Mecca he had no value. He had come as a very poor man. He wasn't a slave, but he didn't have a tribe. He didn't have any influence, and nobody really cared much about him. But over a period of time, he had earned some money and he started a business, and then he became wealthy. I want to remind you that Mecca was a trading city, and people who ran businesses, they tended to do well. The wife of Rasulullah was also a businesswoman. So Suhaib was also a businessman, and he had earned a lot of money. And nobody really thought much of him. Yeah, sure, he has money, but he's got no sons and he's got no tribe. So he's not very influential. But when he came across Islam, he came across the Prophet ﷺ, and he realized that was the truth. He accepted it. And after that, he became a good practicing Muslim. When the Prophet ﷺ eventually told the Sahaba to make hijrah to Medina, he did. But when he was making hijrah, he was one of the earlier people to make hijrah. The Prophet ﷺ had already left. But as he was making hijrah, the Quraysh, they saw him leaving. They said, "You can't go anywhere." So they stopped him and they imprisoned him. So they said, he asked them why, and they said, "Look, when you came here, you were a poor man, but you made all this money from us," which was not true. He had made all of that money from the different trades that he had done with people who were coming to Mecca and going from there. But nonetheless, they said, "This is money that you made from us. This money belongs to us." So he thought about it and he said, "Okay, if all this money, if I give it to you, will you let me go?" They said, "Yeah." They were greedy people. So they said, "Yeah, okay, we'll let you go." So he gave them all the money wherever he'd hidden money or whatever money he was taking with him, he just gave it all to them. And then he left with nothing. No, not a single penny. He left for Medina with nothing. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informed the Prophet about him. And this verse was revealed about him. The verse goes, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَشْرِي نَفْسَهُ بِتِغَاءَ مَرْضَاتِ اللَّهِ وَاللَّهُ رَؤُوفٌ بِالْعِبَادِ. And there are those who would dedicate their lives to Allah's pleasure. By the way, the translator, I don't think he did justice to this. Yashri nafsahu literally means sells himself. So, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَشْرِي نَفْسَهُ بِتِغَاءَ مَرْضَاتِ اللَّهِ, who sells himself for Allah's pleasure, or dedicate their lives for Allah's pleasure. وَاللَّهُ رَؤُوفٌ بِالْعِبَادِ. And Allah is ever gracious to His servants. When Suhaib arrived in Medina, the Prophet saw him, and he had not, thus far, not described anything. He had not shared with the Prophet what he had done. And the Prophet said to him, رَبِحَ الْبَيْعِ. Ya Suhaib, your business transaction was profitable. Meaning, everything that you gave up, it was still a profitable transaction, because what you're going to get in return is obviously far more valuable. A verse in the Quran was revealed about him. So you can just imagine the kind of status that this person had with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is his inner character. My brothers and sisters, the Prophet ﷺ described to us the importance of character in a hadith. He said, خياركم في الجاهلية خيارهم في الإسلام إذا فقهوا. That means the best of you before Islam, without becoming Muslim, if they had good character, are going to become the best of you in Islam. Which means that character is something that they might have had before Islam that might have become a reason for them to become Muslims, but because they already had good character, then they would become very good Muslims. So character is something that, here's an example. We know that among the Muslims, there were levels. So there were the Abu Bakr level and Umar level and Uthman level and Ali level. There was that level. And then there was the level of people who were, who became Muslims towards the very end, like Amr bin al-As. And then there were people who became Muslims only after Makkah was conquered, like Abu Sufyan bin Harb. So these were all Muslims, but they had levels. And whatever kind of character they had before Islam, when they came into Islam, they brought that character with them. The other example is that of Abu Talib and Mut'im bin Adi. These were non-Muslims and they died as non-Muslims. But if they had become Muslims, and this is part of the hadith, إِذَا فَقَهُ, meaning their character helps if they understand. So if Abu Talib had become a Muslim, he had good character even as a non-Muslim, so he would have made a very good Muslim. But it was his choice. Similarly, Mut'im bin Adi was the man who protected the Prophet ﷺ and gave him kind of like a visa to re-enter Mecca when the Quraysh had decided that they were going to kill him on his way back from Taif. So Mut'im bin Adi had gone out of his way, even when the Bani Hashim were in the Shi'b, when they were under siege. Mut'im bin Adi used to send them food secretly. So this was a good non-Muslim. If he had become a Muslim, his good character would have made him a good Muslim. I hope this point is driven home and it's clear, because character is something that we work on. And it doesn't mean that just because we're Muslims, automatically we have good character. It is something we have to invest effort into. And character is built by doing unpleasant things, which is why if somebody's unwell or somebody has pain, generally there's a saying in English, don't worry, it builds character. It's because it is by bearing that difficulty or bearing that pain or bearing that a difficult time, it is through patience that we build our character. So these are a few important points about character, because this is what Surah al-Masad is about. Surah al-Masad is about the character of people that we see in the world around us. This world is full of people who display beautiful lives in public. Maybe you go to Instagram, or perhaps you read about them in the newspaper, or you hear about them in the news. They are amazing people, impressive people, but their reality is hollow. They are our couples, but they're frequently terribly corrupt. They're inept, they're incompetent. All they've learned is the art of selling themselves. Surah al-Masad, which we're going to see right now, is a reminder for us for the kind of character we need to build, for the kind of character that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala values, and the kind of character Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not value, and that's going to land people in the fire of hell. regardless of whether we call ourselves Muslims or not. Let's now talk about Surah al-Masad. Many of you, I'm sure, are well aware of the background of this surah. It's also called Surah al-Lahab. So obviously we know it is about the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ. And many of the stories about this uncle, Abu Lahab, are well known. I'm just going to go through them very briefly just to make sure that the context is clear. So the Prophet ﷺ, in the early part of his da'wah in Mecca, he started with making da'wah to his own family, extended family, uncles and cousins, and obviously he had a large family, and this is Banu Hashim. This is the who's who of Arabia, because among all the Arabs, the Quraysh were at the top in terms of prestige. And among the Quraysh, the Banu Hashim were considered at the top. And then came Banu Umayyah and then some of the other tribes. But Banu Hashim were considered the most well-known or the most prestigious among them. So the Prophet invited his family and he served them food. And after they had eaten, he stood up and he started to speak. Now, his family already knew what he was preaching. So they realized that he was going to preach to them. So some of them, Abu Lahab and the like, they started hooting. So the Prophet was quiet and everybody left. After a few days, the Prophet then told Ali, who used to live with him, to once again invite the family. They came, and this time, the second time, they were invited to eat. So after they had eaten, the Prophet stood up to speak, so they listened. They were listening, the Prophet was talking, and the Prophet started inviting them to Islam, and Abu Lahab started speaking. So Abu Lahab said, okay, so you're telling me that I'm going to have to follow this faith of yours, this religion of yours, but what will I get? What is special for me if I were to, let's say, agree to be a part of this thing? In essence, what he was saying was, I'm worth a lot. So if you're going to have me as a follower, then you better offer me something in return for this. So the Prophet said, nothing special. I mean, what every other Muslim will get is what you're going to get. So Abu Lahab said, in return for that, he said, Tabban, tabban lihad deen. That means, may this faith or may this religion perish. And then he said, again, he used the word tabban. Tabba means may it perish. May it perish if it makes me equal to all of them. Because he could see, he was a smart guy, he could see that this religion will take people who are very prestigious and take people who are not prestigious, and it will give them equal value in the eyes of God, and obviously eventually in the eyes of men as well. So Abu Lahab said, may this religion perish if it makes me equal to all the other men. So the Prophet ﷺ, obviously at that time couldn't say anything. Eventually he moved on to inviting the rest of the Quraysh. And that invitation also is well known to you guys. The Prophet ﷺ stood on Mount Safa, which was the way people used to preach, or which was the way people used to communicate in that time. So he stood on Mount Safa, which used to be much larger. If you've been to Mecca, you know today these are like tiny little hillocks, and they're already covered with tarmac. But back then it used to be a big hill. So the Prophet ﷺ stood on the hill and he said, Ya Sabaha, which was a way of saying that there's something very calamitous, some kind of an oncoming tragedy that I want to warn you guys about. So people rushed, and because that's what they used to do whenever somebody would do that. It was almost like saying somebody's about to attack. So people came, from all over Mecca, and then when they had gathered, then the Prophet ﷺ called them to the worship of one God and said that I'm warning you of a day on which you guys will all be held accountable. So it is a warning that I'm giving you because that is my responsibility as a messenger. At that time, everybody else was still listening, and Abu Lahab, his own uncle, which was, by the way, very unusual because the Arabs, regardless of whether they were Muslim or not, for them, family mattered a lot. And to the extent that some of them, they were, even if a family member was wrong, even if somebody from their own tribe was wrong, they would still support that person because this was a tradition. But Abu Lahab was so opposed to Islam that he even overcame that, and he was always the first one to curse the Prophet. So once again, in this case, he was the first one to say, Tabban lak. That means may you perish. Is this the only reason why you called us here? This word tab, the word they use, perish, was carried by others because Abu Lahab had status. And people would narrate to each other, did you know Muhammad's uncle, Abu Lahab? He was the one who said tab to his own nephew. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used this word in this surah, addressing the character of Abu Lahab and making him an example for all of us to stay away from. That is the kind of character we have to stay away from. But a question comes up, right? Why an entire surah designated for him and, of course, his wife? You see, Abu Lahab was so much of an example of poor character, as we will see, that there is something for us to learn. The surah goes like this: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم تبت يدا أبي لهب وتب. May the hands of Abu Lahab perish and he himself perish. And everybody knew, okay, this is in response to the tab that he had said. ما أغنى عنه ماله وما كسب. Neither his wealth nor worldly gains will benefit him. سيصلى نارا ذات اللهب. He will burn in a flaming fire. Abu Lahab had two sons, and who were engaged with two of the daughters of the Prophet ﷺ. So I just want to give you examples of his animosity to Islam. He told his sons to break the engagement. They did it very publicly and rudely. One of them, whose name was Utayba, he even spat at the Prophet ﷺ. Now, his spit didn't fall on the Prophet ﷺ, but still, the fact that he spat was very insulting. And the rudeness with which they broke off the engagement was to publicly humiliate the daughters of the Prophet ﷺ. So when Utayba spat at him, the Prophet ﷺ made dua against him. And the dua was kind of like this: Oh Allah, please send one of your dogs on him. And Utayba, when he heard this, he realized that this is no ordinary man. And if he's making dua against me, it will come true. So he was always scared of this. Sometime later, the Abu Lahab and his sons were on a trading trip towards Syria. On the way back, they passed through a valley which was known to have some lions. And Utayba was scared, and he knew that he was at greater risk of being attacked by a lion because of the dua of the Prophet ﷺ. Abu Lahab was also scared. So Abu Lahab said, okay, listen, people of this caravan, I'm concerned for my son, so we need to protect him. So what they did was they had camels sit down all around the caravan, and then people slept in a circle, and then in the middle of those people was Utayba. At night, eventually they stayed up for a while, but eventually everybody went to sleep, and a lion did come, and it climbed over the camels, and it climbed over the people, and it made its way directly to Utayba, grabbed his head, and tore him apart. This was the result of the dua that the Prophet made against him when he did whatever he did. So you also remember, we saw this in Surah Al-Kawthar, when the son of the Prophet Qasim passed away. It was Abu Lahab who ran to the rest of the Quraysh with the news, happily saying that the Prophet would now no longer have a legacy. Remember, this is his own nephew, not just a nephew, he was a neighbor of the Prophet. So him and his family, they would, because they were neighbors, and the houses were like right next to each other. If you've seen houses in villages in our country as well, you know what I'm talking about. They were right next to each other. So him and his family, they would throw dirty things, very disgusting things, into the house of the Prophet ﷺ from above the wall. Sometimes when the Prophet was praying, they would throw things on him, like dirty things that would make him dirty and wouldn't be able to continue praying. Eventually, the Prophet ﷺ built something with clay so he could stand underneath it and pray. Sometimes when food was being cooked, and they didn't have kitchens, so they would cook the food in the sahan, in the front veranda. They would throw dirty things into the food. So the Prophet ﷺ would, obviously, he couldn't do much, so he would just carry whatever that dirty thing was with a stick, and he would come outside, and he would say, "Ya Bani Hashim, is this good neighborliness? This is not the tradition of our forefathers as well, even if you're not Muslims." Abu Lahab's real name was not Abu Lahab, his name was Abdul Uzza. He was called Abu Lahab because he was very good looking. Lahab means a flame. And to Arabs, somebody who looked very bright and, with beautiful eyes. So he was a good-looking man, and he was a grandson of Hashim, as you know, Bani Hashim. And among the Arabs, Hashim was known to all of the Arabs as a hero. He was also the minister of finance of the Quraysh, like a treasurer. And whenever, notice that it says two hands of Abu Lahab. So in Arabic, when you talk about two hands, you're talking about influence and power. Now, he had, so far we've talked about all of the things that Abu Lahab was known for his power, his influence, his sons, but he was a man of very poor character. He was greedy. Everyone in Mecca knew that he has stolen from the treasury of the Kaaba, because people would come from all over Arabia, they would give gold, and he stole from some of that. And everybody knew that this man was so greedy that he has stolen. He was a thief. And he was also a coward. So, for example, people would go out to fight whenever people had to fight in Mecca, but he would hire mercenaries to fight in his stead. So, for example, in the Battle of Badr, he didn't go himself. He paid somebody to go in his stead. And he had developed relationships with other powerful people in Mecca, and together they would steal public resources. Today, we would use the word corrupt for such a person. Even though people know that this person is like this, we can't, we and they couldn't say anything in public. That's the kind of character that's being talked about here. Him and his wife were considered a very successful couple. They were rich, good-looking, from the highest caste among the Arabs, powerful and very well connected. These verses, when they came, they were not just a shock for them, for this couple, but for all other people like them as well, that somebody can say something so eloquent and so specific and so true. Somebody can uncover their character. Obviously, the Prophet was not saying it himself. It was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealing it. And notice that it also talks about worldly gains, kasab, and these worldly gains include his sons, his progeny, and it also includes the good deeds that he would do to show people that he was a very important person. Like, people of these leaders of Quraysh, they would feed the pilgrims, and they would compete. I fed this many people, and you feed that many people, and they wanted people to talk about them. So those kinds of deeds is also kasab, worldly gains. But these verses were also a prophecy, and they eventually came true. Until they came true, Abu Lahab used to sit in public and he would look at his two hands and he would show people, my hands are still fine. And Muhammad used to say that my hands would be destroyed, but they have not perished. Until these verses came true, because Abu Lahab got an infectious disease. Most probably it was smallpox. And people wouldn't come close to him. In fact, his own family abandoned him. No one took care of him while he was sick because they were afraid that they would catch it. So eventually he died, but nobody buried him either because they were afraid of being infected. So his body started rotting, and the people of Quraysh, they would smell it, and then they started shaming his sons. So eventually they paid some ahbash, and so these were poor migrants who would come from Africa. So they paid him, and those migrants, they used sticks to push his body into a hole, and then his sons threw stones from far away to cover the hole, such that became his grave. This is how Abu Lahab's own life ended. The surah continues, by the way. وَامْرَأَتُهُ حَمَّالَةَ الْحَطَبِ. And so his wife, the carrier of thorny kindling, فِي جِيدِهَا حَبْلٌ مِّن مَّسَدٍ. Around her neck will be a rope of palm fiber. Now his wife, her actual name is Arwa bint Harb, the sister, by the way, of Abu Sufyan. She was called Jamil because she was apparently very good looking. I have a feeling that she wanted to be called Jamil. Her son's name was not Jamil, but she wanted to be called Jamil, so people will always remember that she was very good looking. And she came from the tribe of Umayyah, obviously a very high status Arab. And she would emphasize her importance by carrying tales about one person to another. Hey, did you hear? Did you know that person, this? Did you know I went into that person's home and my God, that, her house was so dirty. And did you know I went into that, I was talking to that person. I discovered they have this problem with that problem. And did you know this person was like, she would carry tales. And sometimes she would carry tales saying, try to encourage one person to say something, and then she would tell the other person that person said something about you. Hey, what do you think of that person? Oh, I think that person is such and such. Well, did you know that person did such and such? Oh, in that case, that person is such and such. Then she would go to the other person. Did you know that person said this about you? This is called carrying tales. It's a sign of terrible character. This is a sign of a person with extremely bad character. And she would carry these tales. And according to one of the tafsirs, Hammalat al-Hatab, this carrier of thorny kindling, something that causes fire, this is what this means. But according to another tafsir, this is also a prophecy, because um, in the fire of hell, according to this tafsir, it will be her role to carry the kindling as fuel for the fire that her husband would be burned in, along with herself being punished. This is also something that she'd be doing. Allah knows best. These are the two tafsirs that I shared with you. في جيدها حبل من مسد. Around her neck will be a rope of palm fiber. Now she had a very expensive necklace that she would wear around her neck. Likely this necklace was taken from the rights that were taken from other people's rights, and then that's how she ended up with that necklace. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in hell, this would become a form of a rough rope. So after these verses were revealed, very eloquent verses, these verses naturally made their way around Mecca, and Jamil came looking for the Prophet ﷺ, and she was carrying a big stone. So he was sitting with Abu Bakr, and Abu Bakr saw her and was worried. So he told the Prophet ﷺ, she's coming, and I'm afraid that she's going to attack you. So the Prophet ﷺ said she wouldn't be able to see me. And he started reciting the Quran, and she didn't see him. So she told Abu Bakr that she had heard about Surah al-Masad, this surah that we've just seen. And she said that the Prophet ﷺ had written poetry against her. So Abu Bakr said he hadn't. Obviously, the Prophet ﷺ hadn't written any poetry. These were the verses revealed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These were not the words of the Prophet ﷺ. So she said, well, she's also a poet. And she recited verses of her own. مُذَمَّمًا أَبَيْنَا وَدِينَهُ قَلَيْنَا وَأَمْرُهُ عَصَيْنَا. That means, roughly translated, we are tired of the criticized one. Notice the Prophet's name is Muhammad, which means the praised one. So she changed it to the criticized one. We're tired of the criticized one, and we reject the faith that he brings, and we disobey, publicly disobey whatever instructions that he brings. So the Prophet told his companions that these people keep saying evil things about someone named Mudhammam. But I'm not Mudhammam, I'm Muhammad. This is a very beautiful way of just brushing off the rubbish that people say, people of poor character say. This was Surah al-Masad. As I mentioned, this is a surah that is a reminder about building our character. It is not going to happen on its own. Good character is not going to be built on its own. It will take effort. Remember, all that glitters is not gold. The people who seem the most impressive may actually have very poor character. Building character requires unpleasant things, sacrifices, and patient effort done over a period of time. Remember also that carrying tales is haram. You see something happen somewhere, you don't carry it elsewhere, please, because that can be either be ghiba if it is true, slander, if namima, if it is untrue. In both cases, it is haram. And remember also that on the Day of Judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will cover the mistakes of a person who covers the shortcomings of his fellow Muslims. Finally, remember, Jamil, the wife of Abu Lahab, is mentioned along with Abu Lahab because she had some contribution in his bad character, and he had some contribution in her bad character. They made each other worse because of the demands that they made from each other. The worst spouses are the ones who fuel the fire of hell for their husbands and wives. Let's not be like those people. I mean, okay. Finally, the homework. I'm going to share with you guys a link to a YouTube video of Surah al-Masad recited with an ustaz who is reciting, and then a child recites. Is a good way of learning the correct recitation of Surah al-Masad. And this brings us to the end of the session today. Inshallah, next week we will start the last 3 quls of the Quran. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from us. And inshallah, see you guys next Saturday. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.